Sachin.
Hey, Dinkar.
So, Sachin, I think we got a lot of good feedback and more questions on metrics. A little bit on social sites, but a lot of personal conversations. So I thought that we should spend some more time on this. And one of the things we had discussed when we were discussing on output versus outcome, why outcome is so important, right? The question obviously at that time that we raised and everyone had was that if there is nothing to strive for, if you don't give a good example or you don't recommend something, right, bad set of metrics will get picked, right? That's in it. And then I was reminded of this blog that you wrote, and I thought that maybe we should go and the title of the blog, which I'll share in our description, was Dysfunctional Metrics Skill Agile Transformation. As an introduction, what I want to call out, what I really liked about it was that you're not just complaining that this is wrong, this is wrong. You have some certain set of introduction recommendations also.
Correct.
And those who have seen our previous one will recognize some of those recommendations. And I realized how much we have we have been thinking and talking about it so much that we don't realize that we are going to the same set of metrics over and over again, which is a good thing. So as you introduce this, I'll share my screen. So can you set some context about this, especially why you started writing about this, and anything else in order to prep people for this?
Sure. The motivation to write this blog was very simple. We were talking again and again to our customers, our people, and teams were using metrics, which we always used to feel a little cringy to use and put up in front of somebody else. And then it got me thinking, and I started digging around why these metrics are actually not the ideal ones to do. But rather than just finding out literature on why I don't like this, I wanted to basically figure out what is the alternative or better way to measure it. And that's how we started doing it. Particularly, the blog post is talking about agile transformations because mostly the agile transformations are starting from a place where they have a very different way of measurement. They are not using velocity. They are not using story points. These burn up, burn down are very rigid in their scope. And with that in mind, first of all, the change, they are not sure whether this is the right thing or wrong. And most of the agile coaches are still peddling in the industry the metrics about velocity, burn up, burn down, lead time versus cycle time. And by themselves, these are not bad metrics. What happens is, how do you perceive these metrics, or how do you act upon these metrics, or what inferences you are drawing on these metrics becomes even more crucial. So I wrote this blog post, but this blog post is supposed to be just a starting point for teams to decide what they want to do additional to support the hypothesis. So these metrics can give you a hypothesis at best, but then you will need additional things to validate whether your hypothesis is correct or not. And that's how I took an approach. Rather than saying, delete these metrics from your slides, I have suggested, why don't you actually contextualize your metrics with something better so that now your hypothesis can be validated along with something more concrete. And then you can figure out whether you are moving in the right direction or not.
So, Sachin, you mentioned in this, you do call out, right? The reason these metrics are important, are more popular is because they're readily available. Correct. So, people kind of lean onto it, but you also call them dysfunctional.
Yes.
This, which I'm sure you'll go into detail, but I'm really very interested in understanding this aspect. Can you set the context of are we there yet? How why is this such an important question that gets asked? I know from a project management, yes, it's how much money we have left, how much time we have left. But can you spend some more time on importance of this questions, prevalence of this question, and why should I care about it, or why should I even ask this?
Absolutely. And this comment is made in the context of transformation. So as we know, any transformation is a multi-year journey. A company may start doing this transformation and minimum it runs for 18 months to 3 years, depending upon the size of the organization. And when they commission these agile coaches and there are like plenty, what happens is it is a very expensive process and undertaking for the leaders. And initially, first few months go into onboarding, understanding what is the landscape and whatnot. But then, as a year passes and the call comes to actually renew the funding for this program for next year, that's when leaders actually start thinking, hey, where am I in my overall transformation journey? And that's when the question starts coming up is, are we there yet?
Okay.
And to answer this, a lot of people go on and collect these metrics from their existing system. And they want to show that there is a difference now. And how that difference has been achieved is either you are able to deliver software faster. Earlier, they used to, let's say, we are transforming from waterfall to agile. And earlier, the release cycles used to be 6 months. Now you are doing 2-week iterations. What you are trying to showcase is, hey, my software is actually going faster to production. But not only that, but I'm also achieving certain things in faster time. Now, showing this number to link your are we there yet is not a good idea. That's the problem which I'm talking about. Because if, let's take one example, velocity. If you think about velocity is an internal metric at best. It is not an absolute metric. Depending upon where you are standing in your journey of your delivery, it may change because teams get better at understanding, because velocity is directly linked to estimations. And in Agile, you do estimations based on points, and points are relative, they are linked to complexity. So whatever is the team's perceived complexity of a certain feature becomes the baseline for velocity. So in the beginning, I may say that, hey, I do believe the login page is 4 points. But later on, as building blocks are created, that may not look like 4 complexity to me because some of the blocks are readily available. And I may say it's a 1 pointer story now.
Sachin, that is actually a very interesting baseline that you said, that things like velocity, right? They depend upon a team. And I think the implicit thing that you're calling out there is that each team may have their own point of view based on their experience, their capability, or even, login page, for example, has different complexity in different products and different content, right? Maybe in a consumer product, it's all about login using Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and it's one. And the other world, in banking or financial, it may take a totally different. So, that means that these metrics are also dysfunctional in a multi-team scenario, where team A, or even multi-product scenario within the organization, where it almost is unfair to compare velocity of team A versus of team B.
Absolutely, because if team A is working on a feature and they believe because of, let's say, half of the team is ramped up recently and they are new to the system, their initial first few weeks are going to be a little bit, I would not say non-productive, but it will be onboarding time for them. They will need time to come up to speed. But let's say other team is completely gelled with each other. They have been working on that particular stream of work for, let's say, 6 months. the chances are very high that their comfort with that code base, the domain understanding, the overall understanding about the complexities involved in that product would be much better. And for them, due to being spent time into projects for longer duration, they might have also built some libraries and components which can accelerate their path to production. So two teams velocity comparison for the sake of whether these are two equally productive teams is not a good idea. But what people misunderstand is, since this team, the team A, which is having a lot of ramped up people and they are still in onboarding phase, yes, their velocity looks low. And overall in the journey of that last 12 months, yes, there is a dip. So now this causation, this correlation actually is confused with causation. That since there is a dip, it is actually a productivity dip. I would say if you are drawing that plain judgment based on just dip in the velocity, then you are missing the point. Because yes, velocity is showing that you have slowed down, but how should you? So let's talk about positive. Where should we use velocity and what is the right way to use velocity? Velocity is, and I remember from my early days of Agile, right, is in the beginning of any project, what you do is you create a scope, a document like a scope, and then you try to create a raw velocity measure. And raw velocity measure is completely gut feel. What you do is that identify some random cards or features and divvy up your team into, let's say, 2 or 3 groups, and then give this set of cards and features to them and say, in 2 weeks, you and your pair, how many cards you would like to complete. But the best part about this is the BA will hide the story points on that. And then the team will actually say, okay, I'll do this in one iteration. I'll do these cards in one iteration. I'll do these cards in one iteration. And these 2-3 groups do that. Then the BA actually checks the estimates and says group 1, group 2, group 3. Okay, here is what the piles you created. And there will be some piles which will be extreme. Like let's say one pair will deliver 17 points and the other pile will be of only 8 points. And somebody will say that, okay, I will do 24 points, but I will do only 10 points. The BA actually tries to remove the outliers, and then wherever the most number is actually coming, they pick up that velocity for a pair and extrapolate that to how many pairs you have in your team. And then they say, this is your raw velocity, which they start with. And then if it comes to, let's say, 30 points, because you have 3 pairs and the average raw velocity you picked up is now 10, the goal is that you pick up this raw velocity of 30 just to decide how much scope you want to sign up for the first iteration. As soon as you sign the first iteration, essentially you start working on it, and maybe you deliver 25 points. Now that should be used as a base velocity for the next iteration.
Right.
And then you keep doing that. Now there are various schools of thoughts. I have seen in some places they were doing average of last 3 iterations. In some places, I have seen that they religiously take only last iteration velocity. And sometimes I have also seen that they sign up more than what is your last iteration velocity, just as an additional target. But I don't think it matters much because the team is going to do what team is going to do eventually. But this velocity gives 2 important internal benchmarks. One, how much scope needs to be curated for my next iteration? And you should usually have at least 1.5 times of your velocity. Otherwise, you are going to have a little bit, let's say somebody actually pulled up some stories really fast because the estimates were a little pessimistic, and then now they found out that they can deliver faster. You should leave that leeway with your team that these estimates could be estimates.
Right.
If you try to get these story points into a scientific way, that's where things start going wrong. And most of the people actually do that. I am not joking when I say a couple of times I have seen developers arguing about, okay, so last 5 iterations we have delivered 25 points. We have 3 people, that is 8 point per pair per iteration. It is 10 days. So zero point 0.8 is our zero point 0.8 story point is equal to 1 day. They have in fact did that, and I was like, why did you even like went through whole effort of coming up with this point scale and everything? You could have just estimated everything into days.
Yeah.
So that is where people have misunderstandings about how the velocity measure can be made, like used.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, Sachin, is that things like velocity, one of the additional reasons why they can be dysfunctional is because a team will not have the same velocity throughout the journey. Sometimes
Absolutely.
the same team will have highs, sometimes it will go low because of various it's not a predictable pattern. It's a reflection of the complexity of tasks they're picking. So this is
Yes.
more of a retro or a lagging rather than something that can be used to predict and thus plan. And if it's planned that way, then thus put pressure on the team that why is your velocity going down? So that's the dysfunctional aspect behind this.
Absolutely. So to just recap, velocity is an internal metric. Do not use it externally to communicate with other people, because other teams will not know what this number means. The second thing is it denotes only magnitude and not quality. It does not tell you that, okay, I have delivered 15 points worth of features. Now, these 15 points worth of features are great or not.
Yeah.
They are still just absolute magnitude. And third thing is that, as you mentioned, they are not constant throughout the journey of even the team. Forget about different teams. I mean, if you have 5 teams, 5 teams may have completely different set of velocities. Even the team shape and size is identical.
Right.
It could be very different because of perceived complexity of different folks. So what we should do ideally is, and that's where what we are recommending about velocity is juxtapose velocity with something like lead time. That are you getting the features within the customer's hands fast enough? And also change fill percentage, which indicates that, hey, you are actually delivering features faster, but are you signing off these features too quickly because they are facing some
But
issues in
Sachin,
production?
before we go into the recommendation, I want to spend some time on these two interesting laws that you talk
Oh
about.
yeah.
Can you talk a little about Goodhart's law?
Yeah, so Goodhart was an economist, and what the idea of that whole research, and there are various versions of Goodhart also wrote, but this is the simplistic thing which I found is, if any measurement you are creating that you set as target, then it ceases to be a good measure. So the idea behind this is, if you say your team needs to achieve 25-point velocity, then the team will
Achieve
that
it
you should,
somehow.
yeah, you should not use this, because there is other effect which is called Hawthorne effect, and if you research about this is little questionable about the source of this Hawthorne effect, because it was in 1925. It was an electrical factory, and people, scholars don't believe that the right scientific methods were applied to measure this thing. But what I found is it is very much in action. So I don't care what was the scientific background to research and whether they followed certain process. But what I have seen is, if you set a target on me, I will, my competitive bone will start trying to chase that,
Right.
and rest everything will actually start falling apart. I have experienced this Hawthorne effect. So these two combinations are deadly. If
In fact, Sachin, there has been a lot of conversation around it. In fact, I'm reminded of two folks. One, the founder of 37 Signals said that we don't have KPIs because same reason. Then people start running after it mindlessly. And Thomas Sowell, an economist, I read one of his piece where he said that, there are no solutions, there are trade-offs. And I think people look at metrics as a goal or as a solution to a lot of things, but forget that, in a system, if you want something to go, it has trade-off, it has effects on the system. So if you're running after, let's say, velocity, and that's your goal, it is going to affect other things which are not measured or are not in the focus. So you're making trade-offs. Right?
Absolutely.
Then it becomes very important that what is the metric against whom you're okay with other things getting traded off. And your whole blog, the first part is talking about that. Yes, that is inevitable, but let's not pick velocity and these kind of things as those metrics for which we want everything else to get traded off. Let's look at something else against which some things can be traded off.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned about these points, I think they are questioning whether then should you even measure something?
Yeah.
If they are so potential, they have so much potential to affect your team adversely, should you even measure? And to that, I would take a controversial stance from those leaders is it is still worth measuring. The only thing I would like to add is you should know why you are measuring. And I'll clear my first part, why I believe measurement is important. Many times I found out that we are intuitive learners. You and I, let's say we enter into an area where we did not have any formal training. We will make up our own terms. We will make up our own. Imagine that you and I were tomorrow recruited, if we are lucky, by an F1 team as an engineers who are working into the pit stop. And we have no idea about, let's say, all the science behind that. We will come up with our own terms to everything that there is, and based on our rudimentary knowledge of physics and cars and everything, we will come up with many things. Some of the terms will actually go and hit the right corners and some of them will not. So what we will be missing from actually very well trained people in the pit stop is we will not have the language and the greater understanding, deeper understanding behind that. What goals of metrics is that it brings everybody onto the common language. It exactly means same thing to everybody. So it is important that that language, that measurement, that scale is established within the team so that you can understand where other person is. Otherwise, everybody will need to know the status. Everybody will need to know, does this person need help from me? Are they struggling? Are they doing good? And how many times you and I have seen that people have different thresholds to report and ask for help.
Yeah.
So measurements help there to intervene appropriately in time. Recently, I have met a situation where something was actually not going well, but the person was chill. And if I would have been in that situation, I would have been alarming to other people. So based on talking to that person, I realized this person's nature is that way. So unless the house is on fire, I will not start shouting water, water. So if I would have put a measure there to understand whether there is something wrong, maybe I can go and talk to different people and understand this thing early so that I can intervene on time. So that's why measurements are important in my mind. It's just that the purpose should not be to blame people or to trivialize things. You should know when to intervene. That should be the approach.
That's a very interesting point, Sachin, that you put forth, and I really like how you're saying is, I think one of the ways we can interpret Goodhart's law is that measurement is not target and target is not measurement. These are two separate things. Don't mix them. Doesn't work. That's point to number one. Point number two that you raised is that, which is quite profound in many ways, is that measurements are your gives you it's a language that gives you ability to two different set of people who have very different thresholds, have different attitude to communicate with each other. So at a number this I'm okay, but someone will say, but at this number I'm not okay. So they're able to talk to each other about the thresholds using that measurement. So measurement not only gives something, because there's that thing, right? You cannot improve something which you cannot measure. The whole measurement is so tightly coupled to improvement, has in some ways robbed measurement of other richnesses. One of the richness that measurement brings is it gives a common language or a common baseline for different people to come together and communicate. That's a very profound way to look at it, and I'm happy that it came up in this conversation.
Yeah. And in the phrase which you used is commonly used everywhere, is you cannot improve something which you cannot measure. And I think the foundation of that lies into throughput oriented systems. So, and most of the software philosophy is originating from industry philosophy. So if you think about all of our concepts, even some of the terms which we use are very industry led. Example would be is pipeline. Yes. And in assembly line, what matters the most is that the assembly line should keep moving. And any issue in, let's say I don't have a part. Any dip is a problem because it affects everybody.
Yeah, dips are happening as we discuss. Velocity can dip.
Exactly. So the comparison of software development pipeline and assembly line in a car manufacturing facility ends right there where the shape of them is similar. The behavior and characteristics of both are extremely different, but we treat both of them very similarly. So I think we should stop using those metaphors beyond a certain level, and we should focus more on qualitative aspects of software, which impact far greater than just like having a dip momentarily into your pipeline, but it has a wider impact on quality of your software or something else.
That takes us to the same problem, Sachin. If there is no alternative vocabulary, people will revert to that one. The reason that vocabulary is used because the software engineering did not come up with its own vocabulary. They borrowed it from there. And maybe one of the ambitions that people, maybe someone who's listening, or maybe we can pick up the ambition of, if you want people to stop using those metaphors, come up with a whole slew of metaphors all in itself. But putting a pause to that ambition, coming back here, what are your recommendations?
There are two more set of metrics which I compared, and we can quickly talk, and then recommendations will follow swiftly after that. One is basically burn up and burn down. And if you think about burn up and burn down, these are very closely linked to the velocity. At the beginning of your release, you have signed up for 350 points worth of scope, and now your velocity is 25 points per iteration. So it will take certain number of iterations for you to achieve it. And we already talked about it is not linear. Sometimes the velocity goes up. So it may not take 350 divided by 25. It can be achieved in even shorter period of time. But what they do is they start tracking the scope in the burn down or burn up manner. The anti-pattern, what I have seen by doing this is now team thinks, hey, I know the promised delivery date for this project. I have a scope and I'm cutting too close. I do not want to sign up for more scope now. And then it creates a very high degree of friction between business and the team on scope negotiation. In a ideal way, in agile philosophy, you should not worry too much about overall release scope. It should be dealt by business and, let's say, project manager or business analyst from the perspective of negotiation. Yes, this feature, now you believe that it is more important than what we thought 2 months ago when this whole release started. It's okay, but what would you like to drop in to accommodate this?
That's where the product manager is bringing learnings from the market to this back.
Yes, and then you can also question. Yes, and you can also have a question on why do we believe, what changed between last 8 weeks that we suddenly feel that this is far more important than the other one. And it's a very healthy dialogue to have. But what I have seen is team starts resisting, blindly saying that this is now going to disturb, because now you are just like putting my spanner into my whole well-oiled machine. So it is better to not track them to in front of team. I mean, you can do that somewhere else. I'm not against any of these metrics. It is just that how you are using these metrics. As I earlier mentioned, these metrics are popular for a reason. But if you don't contextualize this properly and you do not know what to do with them properly, you will end up destroying either team's morale or create more friction, or even misrepresent what you are actually doing. So it's better to know why you are using this metric and when to use it and when not to use it.
Sure. So you want to continue with
one cycle time, and this is a quicker one. So cycle time and lead time is something which I have seen in the Jira world very frequently. And Jira is the most popular software on planet right now, which people in software industry are using for project management. So whatever Jira does becomes basically the 10 commandments. What I found with cycle time and lead time, cycle time is typically always lesser than lead time. It is the actual time spent in development versus the total time required for an issue to start and get that into hands of the customer. So the challenge with this lead time and cycle time is typically there is a cost of development and there is a cost of certifying that to get into production. And people will want to maintain that ratio ideally. What we misunderstand is sometimes certain features are difficult to test. They will require more time to take it to production. They will require, let's say, sample data. They will require some different infrastructure or environment or understanding. Maybe this is the first time you're doing it. All those things. And then they start chasing this ideal cycle time to lead time ratio. And what it creates is, if you have aggressive deadlines, you start cutting corners into non-functional requirements around this. And this end up hurting you even more. So if you are tracking cycle time, by all means, but to what purpose? Are you using this to measure productivity, or are you using this to measure bottlenecks? For bottlenecks, I am all for it. For productivity, absolutely not. And I think if you are measuring all of these to identify bottlenecks and to remediate or assist or intervene, I think these are the best ways to do it.
Great. Yeah. So we'll move to the recommendations.
Yes. On recommendations, the philosophy is very simple. Is what you need to do is focus on outcomes. And whenever you are using velocity, use supporting metrics to contextualize it. Start making sense of it. If you have been using velocity for a long time, try to shift towards better metric now and try to measure the business outcomes. If you still want to use velocity, make sure that you are also using change fill percentage, lead time as metrics for yourself to have additional supporting data that this velocity is really true measure of my indication of my throughput.
Right.
if you want to use how much time I will need to finish this release, better thing would be is to contextualize that with lead time, change field percentage, how brittle is my system, how good quality system I'm delivering in the soft like production, how much technical debt am I accruing as a side effect of the additional speed which I have gained, or am I creating any security compromises. The best thing about 4 key metrics is that they are, and we have spoken a lot about them, they are abstract. They don't you cannot game all 4 at once. You may be able to game 1 or 2, but not all of them. So this is how I would say you can make sure that you are able to contextualize the purpose of your metrics in the right way.
So Sachin, these 4 key metrics of DevOps is much talked about. Do you want to talk about why the thought process is when we added the 3 key metrics around excellence?
Yes.
Do you want to kind of run through those discussions?
Yes. So 4 key metric talk about something which is in production, but there are additional things. You may be cutting corners somewhere else and still able to maintain these 4 key metrics in a, I would say, healthy margin for some period of time at least. Example is the build failure rate. If the ideal way of teams to manage their development discipline is, if you have a continuous integration environment and it is broken, do not commit on top of it. That's a standard rule. Every developer should follow this. But when they are doing it, if your build failure rate is high, that means people are committing code again and again. And build failure rate is measured simply by number of builds ran into your CI environment versus number of failed builds. Every time you do a commit, the build gets triggered. But if it failed, if it is very high failure rate, that means people were keeping build red for quite amount of time while committing code to it. Typically, this should be lower.
And Sachin, why is it a meta or a derived metric? What kind of things can go wrong for build failure rate to suddenly go up?
It just indicates your developer discipline.
Okay.
Is that you are committing code irrespective of what is the build status.
Right.
When a build is failed, that means either a test case has failed, or there is a dependency issue, or the build failed because of syntax or whatever, right?
Right.
Somebody should go and address it quickly. The purpose of continuous integration, the word continuous integration is I am integrating my code with other people's code, and I want to fail as soon as possible.
Right.
If already a continuous integration environment told you that it has failed, there is no value in committing further more code onto it and then make your life difficult to pinpoint the actual reason why it failed.
Right.
So this is just the hygiene, I would say.
Sure. And tech debt, Sachin, this is a good one. And to be honest, I learned about tech debt from you in past few years, and I hadn't come across this thought process. Do you want to talk a bit about tech debt and why, again, is it meta, and what kind of symptom it is for?
Yes. So whenever people used to think about volume, and we made fun of those metrics, lines of code and defects per 1,000 lines of code and all that, these metrics are very difficult to justify in my mind. But technical debt, at least there is some scientific evidence that they are valid. So how tech debt is measured is, it is a culmination of variety of things. This is based on static analysis, and there are free tool available, open source tools available in the world, where you can practically any language, any software system, you can assess against technical debt. And the technical debt can also vary from team to team. The way technical debt works is you configure this scanner for certain thresholds.
Okay.
You can adopt some thresholds which are industry standard decided by the tool itself, or you can go and pick up some thresholds which your team is using towards. So this is about cyclomatic complexity. This is about your code quality. Code quality, I'm not talking about the hygiene, but I'm talking about, are you writing too long methods? Too long methods means it is just difficult to understand. If I am a new person working onto this project and I'm seeing this 300-line method, it is going to be very difficult for me to understand what is going on. Plus, a 300-line method also indicates that this method is trying to do too much. So whatever name you have given is not indicating. So a good clean code is about readability. The method should indicate what this method does. The class should indicate what entity it represents, that type of thing. So all these factors considered, the branch, how many if conditions switches you are writing. Because every time you create these branch conditions in your brain does not work in if else conditions. It goes linearly. The way we read book. I mean, imagine the complexity of if you write a book where it says, now go to page 15 for this.
There are certain books that are those, right? You kind of create your own stories. Like, what do you think this person does? If A, then go to page number 32. But that's a whole different class of books.
But you don't see that commonly because our brain goes linearly and it can consume at faster pace.
Right.
So it takes into consideration all of these points and gives you a rating. And this rating is a pretty good indicator of what is the overall quality of your code base. Then the debt is not only limited to that. Are you using any libraries? And these libraries are something which, how many libraries you are using? It is also one important measure. Are there some expired libraries for you? Because you need to address that. And technical debt, the debt part is that this is something which you have accrued as effort you need to address. So you have written bad code. It is advisable to you to make it into clean code. By breaking down your long methods into smaller components or creating new classes, refactor your code base and whatnot. So technical debt, the higher technical debt means you are actually taking risks. That if tomorrow I sell you my product and code base, you will have tremendous challenge to understand what this product is. Whereas a lower technical debt code base, you will be able to onboard faster and take care of it faster too.
I think security warnings are kind of obvious in a way, especially the splitting between high, medium, low. So I kind of I get a sense of why these three you're associating with excellence, right? And I think last time we had discussed about the business outcomes. Every business will have their own unique outcomes. And rather than having a metric across business, it made more sense for us to think about category of metrics. And we had a quick conversation about all those four, and they're here also. Coming back to what you were saying, and I think it's very important, is that this idea that the juxtapositioning, right, creating that line of sight. Do you want to talk a little why you think that this juxtapositioning was the key, is the most important differentiation of this kind of thinking?
Yes, I mean, I have tried to research a lot to find out correlations, how you can quantify software delivery progress to some sort of business outcome. I'm pretty sure someday somebody is going to solve this problem. The challenge there is there are too many variables. And our understanding of those variables, can we measure those variables clearly enough? Right. And that's why the 4 key business outcome areas, what we talked about, these are the ones which are evident that you are building a system to either understand the future trends. Are there any threats? Are there any opportunities? You are trying to increase the effectiveness of efficiency of your system. You want to increase the customer experience. You want to increase your influence. And when you are thinking about, and these are categories why we say, because different metrics will come in different categories. If you are doing well on your technical development, then it is bound to happen that you are going to impact positively to the business outcomes. And 4 key metrics, DORA, the organization which actually put this report out, has done this research and gave us enough reason to believe that if you do well on 4 key metrics, the financial results are better.
Will move. Yeah.
Yes.
The other thing that Sachin, I want to call out is that this line of sight from excellence in engineering and pushing software to production, right? And the business outcome is sometimes very obvious in case of consumer products, where the channel of delivery of value and return via payments is singular in nature. So if you have a website and all your business activities is happening on that website, like a bunch of e-commerce kind of solutions, then it becomes very obvious that this line of sight is very clear. And in consumer world, generally, it is relatively easier to do. I think what needs to be called out is the complexity of this in an enterprise environment, where IT is sitting next, if not core to the business, right? And what happens there is that the channel of delivery of value to a client is not just a website, just an app, just an support engineers, document which says in case of this problem you respond. It's a mix of all of this. It's a mix of conversation that people are having with the client. It's a very complex environment, and that's where the importance of what you say, that there is a complex relationship between the two, and that becomes very profound. That becomes very pronounced. It becomes very obvious to everyone who's working in those complex enterprise environment. I think somewhere, this gets missed out. A lot of activity around product thinking, around metric thinking are driven by startups, which are able to create these correlations, move fast. And somewhere I feel that enterprise kind of don't get a good deal from these thinkings, because no one is necessarily thinking at the scale and complexity of an enterprise and trying to come up with it. And that's why I love this to be, like every creator, you are in love with what you have created. But if I step back and look at this thought process and what you have put together and what has come out of this, and the work we have done subsequently on this, is because this really helps enterprises whose world is not singular in nature. There are multiple stakeholders, there are multiple channels, there are users, there are customers, there are advocates. And I think that is when we say that correlation is important, and not stress too much about creating that exact causation and that exact algorithm, or that a transformation from this to this. Don't worry about that. If there's a correlation, you can move forward, becomes very important. And then I feel one of the reasons why 4KM was adopted by enterprises. So
exactly. The only challenge, and you nailed it perfectly when you were explaining why correlation is important and not causation, is earlier, when I was talking about these metrics, I did not tell why it is important to bring it the juxtaposition view.
Right.
The data of these 4 key business outcomes is measured somewhere else. Every sensible business today measures it. The challenge is that, does the engineering team even know what are they impacting? Am I impacting the cost? Am I impacting the performance? Am I impacting the experience? it is very nebulous. And as a large organization, and you said it very well, is when you are a startup, all this data is handled by a very small team.
Right.
So the developers know what are the challenges in customer support, and developers also know what are the challenges in sales. So since everybody is in the know, they can move faster. The sense of urgency is communicated better.
Right.
Also, the sense of accomplishment also flows very quickly, that
Yeah.
I feel motivated to do more. In enterprises, since this data is actually scattered across the organization, across the
And
walls,
protected. And,
it's
and it's
protected.
not always because of bad design. Many times it's intentional
Compliance.
because of compliance and protections. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what is important is, can you get some sense of that data, a high level representation of it or obfuscation, which can bring a meta metrics out of it, and get that and bring it onto the same page as your engineering metrics. The idea is, if it is on the same page as you showed the slide, imagine that we replace all of these with the numbers, and not necessarily in a tool, do it anywhere, I would say. This will facilitate a great conversation with you, your business partners, your stakeholders, your team management, that are we even impacting?
Right.
If there is no impact on the business outcomes which are designated for the system which we are developing, are we even moving in the right direction? Are we even working on features which are directly impacting to the business outcomes? And this I miss so much many times in my career, that people used to decide the priority of features based on gut feel.
Right.
And often their gut feel is correct, but I would not like to take the gut feel as the standard method of prioritization.
Yeah.
And sometimes it used to get into this hearsay territory, where you will believe that your gut feel says it is high priority, and I would say it is low priority, and you and I will keep talking in front of 20 people. It just goes nowhere. And I have seen this in mid-sized companies, I have seen this in startups, and I have seen this in big companies. What will help here is bringing some objectivity to it. And fortunately, with the advent of tools and also awareness, I think, Dinkar, there are many measurement tools are being deployed now, which are more accessible. These are not guarded so closely. People are more open to discuss that with the team. So I'm liking that we are definitely moving in a very encouraging direction. But these philosophical changes will make it even better.
Yeah. And what I want to recommend is that doesn't mean now you have to crack budget and you have to buy some expensive tools, to do all this. There are much lighter ways to do it. And I think one of the things we should discuss at some point is this whole, it's a very passionate thing with me. Initially, we used to call it in-house products. As a developer myself and as a product manager, I had created a lot of tools, small things, frameworks. I talk a lot about those, right? And a lot of times I used to, when I'm interviewing, like, tell me your set of tools, things that you have created, right, to improve your productivity. And that over years have led to a lot of organization having in-house products, in-house tools. And I think, somewhere the importance of these in-house, I don't want to call it product, maybe in order to just to differentiate it, maybe in-house asset, the importance of these assets for every organization to have, where learnings of team A can move to team B and team C, and you can have organizational baselines. It's very important. Maybe at some point we should talk about these in-house products, these assets, and maybe some company can tomorrow take those as products somewhere and make money out of it. But
Absolutely.
definitely there's a cycle there, and that should be one of our conversations at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
This was a good conversation, Sachin. I think metrics is a topic where when we get started, not only we talk a lot about it, but we have created a lot of interesting things around it.
Yes.
And I'm very keen to see where those creations go and how they help. And at some point, maybe we should talk about the difference they have made to our clients and customers in an anonymized manner.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
yeah, and anything else before we wind up?
No, I think we spoke a lot about metrics. I think today this is a little evolving topic, and my only parting thought would be is no metric is inherently bad. Although I have used a very catchy title to that, the goal is to push people into thinking about why they are even using these measures and what is the purpose of it. If they are clear about that, I think any measurement can be utilized properly to like track your team development capacity and also assist them and intervene at right time. So that's the whole goal.
Yeah, I mean, I totally believe and I agree with you that every metric has I mean, I support vanity metrics, right? So
Yes.
what other proof do you need about that?
Right.
So see you, Sachin. This was wonderful. Thank you and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care.